2010 marked the beginning of a series of protests in the Arab world against authoritarian regimes. In the spring of 2011, the Arabellion also took hold in Syria. The regime arrested and tortured children caught spraying graffiti. People took to the streets in response. They demonstrated against the regime of Bashar al-Assad.
الناس خرجت طبعاً بالعام 2011 بعد الثورة المصرية تحديداً. الثورة التونسية أكيد كان لها فضل ببداية الثورات العربية بشكل عام، لكن الثورة المصرية تحديداً هي اللي حمست السوريين للخروج للشارع لأسباب كثيرة. طبعاً الناس خرجت عم بتطالب بداية بالكرامة، عم بتطالب بالحرية، عم بتطالب بالتغيير.
Bashar al-Assad has ruled the country with a number of competing intelligence services. He inherited this system in the year 2000 after the death of his father Hafez, who had come to power in a coup in 1970. Initial hopes for reforms under Bashar, who was 34 at the time, were quickly dashed.
أنا عشت 23 سنة من حياتي تحت سيطرة النظام السوري. خلال هاي السنوات أنا كنت أعرف أنه سوريا بلد غير ديمقراطي، غير حر، غير عادل، ولا توجد سيادة للقانون. وكذلك كنت واعية أنه النظام السوري حريص على تصدير هاي الصورة الكاذبة وغير الحقيقية للخارج، لكن ضمنياً كنا بنعرف أنه هذا الشيء غير حقيقي.
The Syrian regime abducted and tortured many civilians. In the first 2 months alone, regime forces killed more than 1,000 demonstrators. Despite the massive use of force by the regime, the demonstrators remained true to their motto, Silmiye, Silmiye, peaceful, peaceful.
حتى نهاية عام 2011 أنا بحمص كان في مظاهرات دائما، يعني كان في دائما في مظاهرات، البنات بالمظاهرات أو النساء بالمظاهرات. وبعد نهاية 2011 صار خلينا نقول النزول إلى المظاهرة كأنك رايح على حرب.
Deserters formed the Free Syrian Army, which conquered areas in the north and east of Syria by 2013. In the liberated areas, local councils and civil initiatives began taking care of the needs of local residents, including first responders who rescue people buried under rubble or injured. The more prominent they have become, the more they have become a thorn in the side of Russia and the regime. With propaganda and lies, they've been trying to deprive the Syrian White Helmets of international support. While Assad's allies intervened on his side, there was no significant support for democratic forces in Syria. The US no longer wanted to be involved in the Middle East. Europe found itself unable to act on its own. The words of support for freedom seekers have therefore been followed by little action. Turkey and the Gulf states have been filling this vacuum with their own agenda. The Islamist groups they mainly support have been gaining influence as a result, playing right into Assad's hands. He has referred to the demonstrators as terrorists from the start and actively has worked to radicalize the uprising.
قام النظام السوري بيوم اللي خطب بشار الأسد ب 31/3/2011 بيقول أطلق سراح 64,000 معتقل. هن هدول 64,000 أغلبهم تجار سلاح، مجاهدين جهاديين جايين من العراق أو رايحين على العراق أو لهم علاقة بحركات جهادية قاعدية. أطلق سراحهم هو وعمل منية قلنا أنه أطلق سراح معتقلين، هو أطلق سراح عالم مجهزهم على هدوء على سنين. لما يطلق سراحهم هو يتركهم وهن بيتصرفوا، يعني هن بيخربوا اللي هو بده اياه يتخرب.
أنا كمان أيضاً هون بعترض على فكرة أنه تأسلمت الثورة. مو الثورة هي اللي تأسلمت، ظهرت شريحة من السوريين أو المرتزقة يلي استخدموا الدين في سوريا على أساس أنه ثورة. هذه ليست الثورة السورية، وهؤلاء ليسوا السوريين أنفسهم. واليوم في شريحة كبيرة من السوريين في الشمال السوري تواجه النظام من جهة والفصائل الإسلامية من جهة أخرى، وتحتمل القمعين، قمع النظام وقمع هذه الفصائل.
In March 2012, Assad accepted the six-point peace plan of UN Special Envoy Kofi Annan. It called for an end to military force and a peaceful transfer of power to be negotiated in the Geneva process. It formed the basis for UN Resolution 2254 in 2015. However, Russia, as a member of the Security Council, has repeatedly blocked UN resolutions or obstructs their implementation. Iran and the Lebanese Hezbollah have also been intervening in support of Assad. Still, the regime has been on the defensive. It continues to use weapons banned under international law. Assad's poison gas attacks in Ghouta in August 2013 claimed more than 1,200 victims. But a deal between Russia and the US prevented Assad from being held accountable.
النظام حارب السوريين والسوريات بالاعتقال ليفرض عليهم النسيان وليخلي عائلات المعتقلين والمعتقلات يغرقوا بألمهم الشخصي. بعد 7 سنين من اعتقال أبي أنا رفضت النسيان وقررت حاربه بالذاكرة. اليوم بكمل أبي 2703 أيام بسجون النظام السوري. أنا كل يوم عم عد الأيام.
Starting in 2013, the group known as Islamic State infiltrated the north of Syria and proclaimed a caliphate in 2014, where the IS brutally ruled over more than 7 million people. In 2017, the IS was driven back by Arab forces and defeated by Kurdish forces and the international coalition. As a result, the internationally supported Kurdish-dominated Syrian Democratic Forces control the areas east of the Euphrates. At the beginning of 2017, Russia agreed on de-escalation zones with Iran and Turkey in what is known as the Astana process. These are the areas that the regime has been besieging and systematically starving for many years. These de-escalation zones do not serve the purpose of peace. Instead, they allow the regime to focus its war on one area at a time. The Russian Air Force, which has intervened directly in the military conflict since 2015, plays a leading role in these efforts. In 2017-2018, the regime forced one zone after another to surrender. In return, Russia has tolerated Turkey's occupation of parts of the Kurdish regions in Syria. 10 years after the beginning of the conflict, the fate of the Kurdish regions and those east of the Euphrates have not yet been decided. This accounts for 40% of Syrian territory.
السوريين اليوم تحولوا من سوريين إلى مجتمعات كثيرة من السوريين، يعني في سوريي الداخل سوريي الخارج. سوريي الخارج أيضا متنوعين بالتأكيد ومنفصلين عن بعضهم البعض، وما يجمع بينهم حتى اليوم غير موجود. يعني الوطن اللي بيجمع هذه الأقليات أو الأكثريات فهو لسه غير موجود كوطن. فبالتالي برأيي من الصعب على السوريين أنه يعيشوا مع بعضهم البعض بوقت قريب للأسف.
More than 400,000 people have been killed. Over 130,000 have been abducted, mainly by the regime, and they are still missing to this day. More than half of the Syrian population has fled. Many refugees are not prevented from returning solely by the war, but due to the fear of political persecution. The challenges are enormous, but many Syrians believe in a better future.
سوريا بحاجة لنظام يعمل. ما في غير ديمقراطية تعمل.
It is unclear how people are supposed to overcome the grief and hatred, and whether there can still be a future as a united country. And yet the activists continue to work for justice and freedom, in exile, in Idlib, and wherever they can. Democratic change can begin when Assad is no longer in power.